Welcome to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, your host. Glad you could join us. Great show in store for you. Our guest this week, author, writer, columnist, all sorts of other things. You've seen his videos, I hope, because I have sure learned a lot from Tom Huggler, and you will too if you stick around. We also have a public access tip. We'll cover some hunting strategies and dog handling advice, and the long-awaited, eagerly anticipated Upland trivia quiz. It's all coming up on the Upland Nation podcast, so stick around. We're just getting warmed up. The podcast is brought to you by SageandBreaker.com. Stock up for the season on all their gun care and gun cleaning gear. Get on the mailing list, and you will be the first to know about the 12 new products coming, including a range bag for you target shooters. And ESPAmerica.com. I learned a long time ago that hearing loss is cumulative. Protect yours with gear from ESPAmerica.com. And joining me now on the show, Tom Huggler. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Good to talk with you. I know of your work, but I don't think we've met. If we have, I must have been a long time ago. I sure can't remember.
Well, I'm the same way. You know, we might have crossed paths somewhere, but this will be our first chance to talk at length, and I'm looking forward to it for a whole bunch of reasons. You know, in your own way, you are kind of a legend in our world, especially if somebody is a grouse or a woodcock hunter. I know you've written books on all sorts of other subjects, including fishing, but you know, that is, in talking to people about what we were going to do today, that seems to be the kind of the niche to a lot of people, at least in their heads, those North Woods grouse and woodcock hunts and all the things you've done in that world. How do you ever, I guess I'll call it center or focus on those? Is it simply a matter of geography?
Well, that's certainly a part of it. I live in Michigan, and we're blessed with so much woods and waters. My word, we've got 3,000 miles of Great Lakes shoreline alone, and Minnesota brags about 10,000 lakes. Well, we have 11,000. And the only thing we miss are mountains. We've got just about every other kind of habitat. And I grew up with a father and an older brother who enjoyed hunting and fishing, and I guess I'll always be 7 years old following my dad's English setter in pheasant fields back in the mid-50s when pheasants were as thick as blackbirds in the Thumb region of Michigan. And I grew up in the Flint area, so I was just at the base of the Thumb, and we used to go up there a lot and hunt ducks on Saginaw Bay, and oh my gosh, I spent a lot of my life outdoors. I sure have.
Well, you're lucky enough to be able to admit to that. I got a late start, and a lot of us did, but, you know, things have changed a lot in that area, literally and figuratively. You're now chasing, you know, more forest-oriented birds than you were back in the day. What is it about these grouse and woodcock that kind of trip your trigger?
Well, I'll talk about my favorite bird, Scott, and that's got to be the woodcock. It's the only upland bird that we hunt with pointing dogs. I know mourning doves are considered upland, but we don't hunt them with pointing dogs. And when I say the only upland bird, what I mean is the only upland bird that migrates, that we hunt with pointing dogs. And to me, that adds a special mystique to the bird. I don't know where he was last night. When I miss him, I don't know where he's going or if I'll ever see him again. Sometimes with grouse or pheasants, you can actually target a specific bird. You can't do that with woodcock. They're here and there. They're like poltergeists, and I just find that fascinating to me. I think I came to terms with all that when I followed woodcock from their northern nesting habitats in the Great Lakes states and went out to the Maritimes and New England, and then hunted them all the way down into Louisiana, and they're just a fascinating bird wherever you find them. And they're, you know, pretty much north of the Mason-Dixon line and east of the Mississippi. That's their nesting range, at least. And just the fact that they're vagabonds, they're wanderers. Well, I'm a wanderer, so that trips my trigger. As
Yeah.
far as grouse are concerned, I love grouse hunting too, but I tell you, they are one tough game bird, and they are getting tougher. When we say grouse, we're talking rough grouse, of course. There's half a dozen other species, all of which are fun to hunt too. But the rough grouse is a forest bird, and we have a lot of forest in Michigan. We're lucky to have a lot of cutting going on, regeneration of forests, young timber. That's what grouse like, particularly aspen. So do woodcock. And so that gives us a bit of a mecca here in the upper Midwest. So, I hunt for woodcock and I take my grouse incidentally. Now, when woodcock season ends in early November, then I'll focus on grouse. And, if there's any woodcock around, we just laugh when they fly away after my dog points them.
You talk as if the word I want to use for woodcock is ephemeral. In this case, it's physically ephemeral. They're here today, gone tomorrow, that sort of thing. I mean, have you ever make an artistic allusion to that kind of hunting?
Oh yeah, yeah, I have quite a bit actually. The woodcock is, the Senecan Indian myth says the woodcock was put together from the leftover parts of other birds. It's an odd little guy. It's got a nice pick for a bill. It walks like a bowling ball about to tip over. And there's just so many neat things about it. It's the bird of legend and lore and mythology. Supposedly, the three black spots on a woodcock's head are from the Virgin Mary blessing her, blessing the bird with three fingers, and left that brand on the bird's head. I mean, that kind of stuff is neat when you think about it.
It's funny. I've never heard that legend, but I sure love it. And there are probably dozens more like that. And for half of the country, at least geographically, half of the country, they're so mysterious because we don't see them on a regular basis or even a periodic basis.
No, well, they're nocturnal birds. That's another reason they migrate at night
Mm-hmm.
and rest and feed during the day. And when we hunt them, of course, sometimes they're so tired from flying they don't want to fly again, and they'll hold real nice for dogs when they're like that.
Yes, even for bad shooters who harvest more alder trunks than woodcock when they go. But that's a story for another day. You talked about rough grouse as being hard to hunt. I think that's the term I was at least in my mind hearing. Is there something in particular challenging about them that maybe you can help us with?
Well, they're very smart birds, for one thing, and they know their habitats. Their home range is fairly small. A rough grouse can be hatched, grow up, live, and die in a 40-acre plot. Now, they do wander, they can wander, and with radio telemetry, our DNR has shown that rough grouse will move up to 25 miles. But that's a young of the year bird, a juvenile that's seeking out a territory. And so you do find them far from home, so to speak. Otherwise, they're stay-at-home birds. And so they know, I swear they know every tree. And you flush one and you pull up and you're ready to shoot and there's that tree in your way. Somehow they're just artful dodgers. They know how to get around stuff and through stuff. I remember watching a video somebody made of a goshawk chasing a rough grouse. You may have seen that.
Yes.
And this bird made himself so small and so slim that he could just zip and dart, and the hawk could hardly follow. They're escape artists. They know how to do it, and anymore they run a lot too. It's
Mm.
amazing how far a grouse will run. We put a radio collar on one and flushed it, and that grouse went 400 yards after it landed. The average flush is only 50 yards or less, but when that bird hit the ground, he took off like a rooster pheasant, and it was a quarter of a mile before we picked him up again. So you've got to have a dog that knows how to track, knows how to walk on eggshells. It takes a special kind of dog to hunt rough grouse. They are the toughest bird out there as far as I'm concerned.
Speaking of special dogs, we'll get to that in a moment. You're listening to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm your host, Scott Linden. That's author, DVD producer, filmmaker, if you will, Tom. That's Tom Huggler there on that end. And before we do, I want to draw an analogy between what you just described in terms of rough grouse behavior and a 4-year-old or wiser brown trout. You see the connection there?
Yes, I do. And they're nocturnal too, aren't they?
Yeah, now
Well,
that you
grouse
mention
aren't
it.
nocturnal, but brown trout are. You catch those things at night if you're able to stand the bugs and being out there in the pitch black. And
They know their
yeah, they're a lot of fun.
territory inside and out. And like you said, all they need to do is pick up that bug and then they're boom underneath that cut bank, just like
Yeah,
your grouse. Yeah,
just like the grouse.
you're notorious, I guess, is one way to describe your passion for English setters. I don't know if that's all you did. It sounds like that's how you got started in that world when you were a kid, but are you still kind of loyal to that breed, and why?
Well, I am, but I've integrated my kennel too, Scott. I've got a dark dog out there. I've got a German short-haired pointer, a young dog. He's just 2 years old. I have an adopted son who's 13. He named the dog Bounce. I said, why do you want to call him Bounce? He said, well, his name is really Bounce Back. I said, what? He said, Bounce Back. When he was a puppy, he said he jumps on me and I push him off and he bounces right back. I said, okay, well, let's call him Bounce, and that's his name. But I have had another German short hair before that. I've had a Brittany. I've had a slew of Labrador retrievers. I've had Goldens. We even had a beagle and used to hunt pheasants with it, and a few mongrels along the way. But always and always there's going to be a setter in my kennel. Again, I go back to being 7 years old. My dad had a setter named Queenie. I'd get off the school bus in the rural Genesee County where I grew up. I'd run home from the bus stop and put on my dad's socks and hunting boots and pop gun, I guess. I can't remember if I even carried a gun, but anyway, off we'd go. I'd let Queenie out. She'd, point pheasants and we'd chase them. And my dad always wondered on the weekends when he finally got to hunt his dog why she wouldn't hold a point. I think I had something to do with that.
Well, that was back when you were learning instead of teaching, and you, like me, in fact, I think that's one of the other many things we have in common. You were a teacher, I was a teacher, and here we are still teaching in one way, shape, or form.
Yes, exactly.
That is, I've enjoyed your videos. I've enjoyed your writing and your books and your column in Shooting Sportsman and elsewhere we've seen your work. Of all of that stuff, what is there an overarching message? What are you trying to tell us? What is your oeuvre supposed to be conveying to us? I can't believe that. I don't think I've ever used that word before.
That's a good question, and it causes me to stop and think about it. And it changes over time, of course. Way back when it was get the limit, it was, have the best dog and find the best spot to hunt and make sure you come home with the limit. Well, that transitioned into, well, now I want a trophy. I want, a pheasant with spurs as long as a golf tee. I want that older bird. He's the smart one. And now it doesn't really matter. It's just being out there. And I'm glad I've come full circle on that because there's more to it than just, shooting a bird. I don't think I'd hunt birds if there wasn't a dog involved. To me, it's part of a drama. It's you, the bird, the dog. The dog's the most important part. Well, after the bird, of course. I'm the least important part. Hit or miss, it's the experience that I'm after. And I try to, put that in my writing. I want people to feel, if they can, what I feel. And I try to write, plainly and bluntly and honestly about what I feel when I hunt. You have to be careful of that because you can get syrupy and sappy and and I don't want to do that. I mean, nostalgia is a good thing, but you have to give it out in small doses. And what I try to do is trip people's triggers. I want them to, walk with me, and many of them have. And if they're people I don't know, we know something in common. There's a bird out there. He lives in beautiful habitat. Let's go find him. And let's bring a dog, a good dog. If he's not a good dog, let's make him better. Let's train him. And let's just let, nature have its way. Let's see what happens. And being part of it, it's almost like, being a voyeur. I mean, you're there and you're experiencing it, and you don't always have to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
I had a woodcock fly by me one time, and the sun was just right, and that bird looked at me, and I couldn't pull the trigger. Now, am I a softy? No, I shot the next bird. It was just that human element, that touch, that intimacy that I feel for these things. Birds, dogs, habitats, friends, people, good restaurants. It's all part of the experience, and that's what I try to put through in my writing. Whether or not I'm successful, I don't know.
I think you are, so. and you just were. I couldn't put it better. I can relate to every bit of that. I started in this world, and the reason I'm sitting where I am today is because I was a over-the-top fly fisher. And in that world, we had a great version of this continuum you just described. First, you want to catch a fish. Then you want to catch a lot of fish. Then you want to catch a big fish. Then you don't care if you catch any fish anymore.
Isn't that funny the way it works? I remember reading, people like Gene Hill and others before him, Buckingham, and some of the other older writers, Burton Spiller and so forth. And more or less, they all came to that conclusion. And I thought, when I was a young man, I thought, wow, I don't know if I'll ever be that way. Oh, yeah, I'm that way. It happened.
Yeah,
it happened. And a lot of times, Scott, when you're out there, you're hunting memories. When I see my setter, his name is Reagan. It's not like the President Reagan. It's spelled R-A-G-A-N.
The Shakespeare character.
Yeah, it's a Shakespeare character.
Yeah.
It comes from King Lear. One of his daughters was Reagan, and although he's male, I still call him Reagan. Actually, my daughter named him Reagan, and I thought, how's that going to work? And then I thought, oh, King Lear, yeah, that'll work. So I've always named them after, literary characters. So I've had a Blake and a Fagin and a Chaucer and a Macbeth and Sherlock and Blake and now Reagan. But anyway, just seeing that dog go through the woods, it just takes me back to the first setter I owned. Her name was Brinka, and I hunt that memory, or I think about Lady Macbeth and the way she would lead me to a bird or show me with her eyes where the bird was. And so we hunt memories, and the good Lord willing, you put in a lot of years like I have, and you have a lot of memories. You got a real bank you can go back to.
Well, ponder that during this short break, and then we're going to talk a little bit about maybe something both of us are a little less familiar with, because I have a question from a listener that I will attempt to answer in my own small way, and hopefully you're willing to chime in. That'll be about flushing dogs in just a moment. So hold on. Tom Huggler over this quick break. You're listening to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden. Stick around. We have a couple quick messages, and then we're going to be back with a dog training and handling tip. Take a moment when you're done listening here to head on over to Dakota283.com. Learn about all the varieties of dog kennels that everybody over there is making these days, as well as some of the other accessories, from the Forever insert for puppies to the Dine and Dash, which will hold water and food at the same time. And then take a look at some of the military grade technology they're using, especially the rotational molding techniques that they're using to make their the walls, the plastic, everything that looks plastic is made with a resin these days, and it is military grade, so it holds up during the cold. especially impacts during the cold. All that information and more at Dakota283.com. And speaking of impact, if your ears are feeling the impact of shooting, whether it's on the range or in the field, espamerica.com is where you need to visit. Find out all about the hearing protection options there, starting at $900, including a custom fitting right there in your own town, so you don't have to go too far and you don't have to go to a sportsman's show like so many other people do. espamerica.com, all sorts of great technology in the digital world, as well as some of the nano coating technology that now comes standard with every model. It's all at espamerica.com. Glad you stayed with us. Tom Huggler is on the line with me. This is the Upland Nation podcast. That musical cue, pardon me, tells us it's time to talk dogs and dog handling. Tom, feel free to chime in if you have anything interesting, let alone constructive to say. Good friend of mine up in your country, in fact, just got himself a Cocker Spaniel puppy, hoping to ultimately pair it with his short hairs in the grouse woods. He's like you, and he's inducted me into the Fellowship of Grouse and Woodcock Hunters. One of his biggest concerns is getting that dog to pattern close enough and in the right way so that the birds get up in gun range. And I offered him my one bit of advice about how to make that work based on what little I know. Tom, have you had any experience with flushing dogs and working that? Maybe your Labradors in the good old days?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've got a lab now, and she's a flusher, and she just naturally hunts close. In fact, she worked it out where she'd rather walk at heel and let the setters, find the birds, and then bust the point. And that's where I've got to be real careful. I had a combination years ago, a Lady Macbeth and a lab called Holly, a yellow lab. I hunted them together too, and it got so that I had to let Holly go through the woods with a 10 or 15 feet of check cord on her, and whenever Macbeth would point a bird, I'd have to tie Holly to a tree because she'd run out and bust the bird. I couldn't stop her. The prey drive was so strong in that dog. And I swear my setter would look back and say, Huggler, would you please control your stupid Labrador Retriever?
Yeah.
She's busting my points. And now I tried to do that with my current dogs, with Reagan, the setter, and with Butterscotch, our yellow lab. And it's not working out too well because what will happen is when I'm focused, Reagan points a bird and I'm focused on Butterscotch because I don't want her to bust the bird. And guess what? Reagan's busting the bird. Reagan is creeping and flushing the bird, and my eye is on the lab. And I had a friend of mine, Al Stewart, point that out to me last fall, actually. He said, Tom, I don't know if it's wise to hunt those two together without making sure that, because Reagan they compete with each other, and Reagan doesn't like her busting his point, so he's doing it on his own.
Well,
and when I realized that, I quit doing it. But I'd love to hunt the two together, and you can. It just takes a lot of training.
it is a massive project. I've always thought about that. I worked with some great pairs like that in the past at some lodges, and some not so great pairs here and there as well. The one thing I can suggest for Mike and everybody else who's got a new flushing spaniel of one sort or another is, if you got two friends, and some of us are lucky enough to have two friends who will walk the field with us, and bags full of birds, I'm told that the best way to get that dog to work in close is the same way I've been told to get a dog to work out farther. That is, have those friends be walking along with you and dropping birds every once in a while at the range you want your dog to think that's where the birds are. Seems to work for most of the spaniel guys I know, and it does kind of reflect on a story I remember years ago with my first wire hair. I finally took the guru at the time out to dinner one night, and I said, Bill, my dog, he's ranging out 200, 300, 400 yards in the Chucker Hills. And Bill finally confided in me the reason was there aren't any birds between here and there. So that's why he's there. And, if you take the corollary to that, it's, well, put the birds in close, the dog will stay close. Make any sense, Tom?
it does make sense. Yeah, it makes sense a lot. Hmm. I've never heard of that, but it makes sense to me. I, I take a lesson from Walters, who was one of the early dog trainers.
Mm-hmm.
His books are 50, 60 years old, and I still refer to them, especially the book called Gun Dog.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, Walters recommends taking a puppy and getting it out, or any young dog, and making sure that dog gets good and lost when he's out there with you. So you put a dog in a controlled environment. It could be a pasture that's grown up or some CRP ground. You walk in there. When the dog takes off, you go hide and make that dog find you. And the dog will panic because it doesn't have the confidence on its own yet. It's young. And make that dog find you. And the dog will eventually, if you do this enough, it'll come to realize that, this is a two-person game here. I mean, it's not just me. I can't just run off anywhere I want. I've got to stick close to him. And so that I've always, done that. And I've never had, well, I have had dogs that would run for the horizon. And, you have to correct that with check cord and e-collars and that sort of thing. But you can do a lot early on with a young dog by making sure it gets good and lost. And that dog, you'll see it on his face. When he finally finds you, oh, he's just so happy.
Yeah.
And I've done that with my bounce, with the new short hair. That dog naturally now hunts close. He won't go out more than 30 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want. As an older hunter now, I don't want to chase dogs.
Well, especially in the grouse and the woodcock woods, you're probably good for that. Where I hunt, we want the opposite at times, but we do want the dogs to check in. In the NAVDA world, we call it cooperation. And one thing that I've done that kind of plays off of what you've described. We play hide and seek, and the dog, hopefully comes back. He gets some sort of praise or reward when he does come back. Eventually, that morphs into at least looking for us every once in a while. And if you can look at the dog, and when he looks for you, you give him some sort of praise. All of a sudden, you've got that kind of nonverbal communication that at least is reinforcing that whole idea about your hide and seek idea.
Scott, I used to holler at my dogs a lot going through the woods, especially grouse woods.
Yeah.
Make sure they knew where I was. Well, you know what? I don't do that anymore. Now I kind of subscribe to that silent command system of the one that
the Smiths.
Smith people are promoting, and it really makes sense. My dogs look for me. They're always looking for me. They want to know where I am, and a lot of times I just stop and wait, and they'll come around. And I've actually got Reagan pretty well trained to hand signals now. I don't have to say anything to him. I just motion with my hand. I'm here, I just read that dogs don't see hunter orange very well, and so you want to, give them lots of waving of the hands so they know where you are. You don't want to have to holler or blow your brains out with a whistle.
Yeah.
And once in a while, I'll give just a little toot just on the whistle just to let them know I'm over here. And otherwise, they hunt on their own and they hunt close. And that's exactly what I want.
I will clear my throat when I know the dog is within hearing distance but not finding me yet. So it doesn't sound like I'm yelling at him or calling him. I just want him to know where I am, and that's one way to do it. Maybe we should be wearing bells in the woods. That's enough. That's good. Don't take that to the next step and put an e-collar on me. But
I don't want an e-collar. My dog doesn't either. I only use an e-collar to correct the situation.
Yeah.
I don't usually hunt with an e-collar on my dogs. I don't need to, although with Reagan, he likes to chomp on porcupines. So if I'm in Porky Woods, I will put one on him just so I can, force him off.
Yeah.
He'll just go for a pig every time, and every time he does it, it costs me $400 for quill extract.
Let's not go down that road, at least not today. Hey, before I forget, Tom Huggler, here on the Upland Nation podcast, if we want to learn more about you, buy a book, find out what you're doing these days, you got a good website that we should write down and add to our favorites list?
No, I don't anymore, Scott. I appreciate that opportunity for promotion, but no, the best way to stay up with me would be to read my columns
Great.
in the Pointing Dog Journal. I write a column called Eastern Encounters. It comes out every other month. Or in Shooting Sportsman, I write the back page column there. It's called To the Point. Both of those are bi-monthly magazines. And, you know, for anyone listening, if you're not getting those magazines, you should consider a subscription. They're really excellent. There's lots of good stuff in there. And, you know, I can't speak highly enough about them. I write for them because they're quality magazines. They're quite different, too. And but no, and many of my books are out of print now. I think the only quail hunting in America has been in print since 1987. It's still available through Stackpole. Actually, Stackpole sold out, so the new publisher will have it. You can Google this stuff, and you can get all my books on the secondary market, or Amazon carries a lot of them. Yeah.
If you had to pick one, whether it's older or newer or somewhere in between, could you? I know it's like asking you who your favorite child is, but what book did you enjoy most writing? How's that? I'll put it that way.
Oh, it's easy. That's an easy question. It'd be A Fall of Woodcock. A Fall of Woodcock. That recounts my love affair with this little bird and my travels throughout North America to hunt him. You know, there's only two species of woodcock in the world, the American and the Eurasian woodcock, and they're found over in Ukraine and Russia and Turkey and other places. I've hunted them in Ukraine and in Russia. They're a wonderful bird there, too, and the French just love their woodcock. Bécasse, they call it. Nothing eats better than a bécasse. Ask any Frenchman.
Served up on crispy toast with the right kind of, I don't even want to describe it, but you know what I mean.
The trail. Yeah, I know what you mean. I've only had it once. I don't recommend it.
No. Look it up, everybody.
Yeah.
You know, you've walked around a few miles here and there in the grouse and the woodcock woods and everywhere else, whether it's Russia or anywhere else. And you know, and they do things differently over there, and I know that. But you know, in all of those experiences, I mean, what are some of the incredible, less common things that have happened to you out there that will never leave your memory?
Oh, well, let me briefly tell you about a hunt in the Ukraine for these Eurasian woodcock. They're half again the size of the American bird, and they migrate through the Ukraine and especially the Crimean peninsula where we hunted them, and then they cross the Black Sea into Turkey. And that's a long way. That's 150 miles, which is nothing for a woodcock. They'll go 400 miles a night if they want to.
Wow.
But there was a spot that we couldn't get to. There were 5 or 6 of us hunting, and our guide said at the end of the week, he said, fellas, I want to take a couple of you into a remote area. We have to walk in. It's 12 miles in and 12 miles out, and we think that Huggler could handle that. Now, this is 20 years ago. I was younger, and we think Al Stewart could do it. And the rest of you guys, we don't want you to take you in there because we just don't think that you'd be able to handle that kind of hoofing it up and down hills. So I went with 23 shells and my 28 gauge, and I stripped down. I mean, no camera, no notepad, nothing. I had a long sleeve shirt and a very thin vest, and it was cold. But we walked, well, we figured about 25 miles that day, and we ended up, I think if I remember right, I'd have checked my notes. We flushed 50-some woodcock, and Al and I bagged 16. And what a day that was. And the dog work was just immaculate. And I never felt more alive in my life, especially when we got back after walking all that distance. You talk about an endorphin rush. And I had that all day long up there. I couldn't do it now. That sticks out in my memory as just being a fantastic hunt you'll never forget.
Now, was it the foreignness, or was it the big, I mean, all the birds, or was it all of the above combined? I mean, was it the melange of all the experiences that made one incredible experience out of it?
Yeah, exactly. The terrain was different. It was like hunting in a medieval forest. It looked like something out of a Tolkien novel. The beaches were 500 years old, huge sprawling trees. and the birds were on the forest floor. They weren't in cover that you'd normally expect. And then the up and down. I mean, the 3,000 feet of altitude is normal. Where you live, you probably don't get altitude sickness, but I live at 700 feet above sea level, so this was really a change. And then the food, of course, and everything was different about hunting in Ukraine. And it was a combination of all of the above. The dog work. Oh my gosh, we had an Irish setter, 9 years old, and an English setter, 9 years old. And the English setter had 6 litters of puppies. And that dog could hunt. I swear I don't know how that dog got its energy. But it could just go, go, go. And it wasn't fed all day long.
Wow.
But the guys also lean and tough, and they were good people. It was a great hunt.
Well, it sounds like something. I remember turning down a trip to fish steelhead in Russia, and I'm glad I didn't go. It's a long story, but it sounds like the kind of place that and it doesn't need to be that area. It doesn't need to be Ukraine. It doesn't need to be France. It could be anywhere. But if it's somewhat foreign to us, I think that probably is the thing that opens the door for all the other experiences to add up.
They live in beautiful places, wherever that is.
Yeah, that again reminds me of Volker's Testament of a Fisherman.
Yes, that's right.
We'll get around to that on the next podcast when we talk fly fishing. But for now, whether it's the Ukraine or Michigan's Upper Peninsula or somewhere else, you've learned a lot about hunting and hunting dogs. Of all the things that you've learned and maybe taken to heart in terms of more practical advice, is there something that you think we ought to also take to heart that perhaps we haven't yet?
Oh boy. Yeah, to me it would be the finite nature of what we do. I wonder if we'll be doing this 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now, for me, one of which is loss of habitat, one of which is loss of the tradition. I mean, it's magazines like Shooting and Pointing Dog Journal keep those traditions alive, but it's just the number of subscribers isn't what it used to be. We're losing hunters. We're losing habitat. And I worry. I just lost a pheasant fen. I call it a fen because it truly was a wetland. And it was beautiful. It was so good for hunting pheasants. And it's just a small 10-acre patch of reed canary grass and ragweed and whatnot surrounded by cropland. And the people sold the farm, and the next guy drained the wetland and turned it into row crop of corn and soybeans.
Wow.
And that was the end of that beautiful little paradise. I could always count on moving a rooster in there. Sometimes I'd shoot a rooster, sometimes I'd let it go. But it was there, and now it's not. And it'll never come back. So that's my concern, is for the future of what we do. And I love it so much. I'm lucky to have lived at a time when I could do all this, and I'm not sure that'll happen in the future.
The next question was going to be the first question, and that is, how do we deal with that? How do we ensure that it survives? But I think one of the ways that you do it, and one of the ways that I do it, in the broadest sense of the term, is we show people what can happen to somebody when they go out and do this stuff. Some of us are recruiting in one way or another, or they're working with kids, or they're working with veterans, or whatever it is. But you're absolutely right. And, the scary part of this is there is no flip side to that record. We never hear or read about somebody, well, I take it back. We do, but not nearly as frequently. We never hear about a new habitat being created as we do about something being plowed under or drained or anything like that. So
you can restore habitats, and there's hope there. But it's a matter of scale too, Scott. I mean, we've lost so much. We've lost, I don't know, probably 75 to 90% of our wetlands in Michigan alone, and you can't bring those back for the most part. So.
Yeah. Well, so then we all ought to join Pheasants Forever and the Rough Grouse Society and help them do what we think needs to be done. There's
Well,
my
all of that helps, but I don't want to end your podcast on a dispiriting note, but so I want to put this out there for people to think about. The good old days are now,
mm-hmm.
just like 100 years ago when people hunted and they'd walk behind a wagon loaded with prairie grouse that they were shooting by the hundreds and could ship them off to the restaurants in New York City and Chicago. That was their good old days. Well, you know what? We have good old days right now too. And maybe 50 or 100 years from now, the good old days will be hunting on a preserve, or maybe it'll be a limit of one instead of a limit of what, 3 or 4 or 5. But it's a relative question. What are the good old days? The good old days are the day you're alive and you can go out and do something that you enjoy and then remember it. And if you're lucky enough to write about it and share it with others, then that's a double bonus right there.
All you got to do is talk to somebody long enough and you'll find out that they know or you know somebody who's worse off than you, and you better live life today. And, Steve Smith, our good mutual friend, a few months back when he was still editing the magazine, wrote a column about exactly that. The time is now, and we should be taking advantage of it. And you're right. And, if we all treat it that way, maybe the mindset will shift slightly and we'll all be a little bit more motivated. And, to know it is to love it. How do we know it? Go out.
That's exactly right. And the French, they have that right too. The old carpe diem, seize the day.
Yeah.
It may be your last. Enjoy it. Make
well,
the most of it.
Those are words to live by. And Tom Huggler, I'm so glad we had this time together. We'll do it again. I've got another 2 pages of questions, so we're just getting warmed up, but I'll turn you loose for right now because there's a lot here to digest and ponder and all of that. You listeners stick around because all the fun is just getting rolling here. We've got public access, and we've got a quiz with a prize. Stephen Malm, if you're listening, stick around. Tom Huggler, always a pleasure to read your work. Now it's a pleasure to listen to you as well. I'm going to go back and watch one of your videos tonight just for nostalgia's sake, if nothing else. Thanks again for joining us on the Upland Nation podcast.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine, Scott. I'd love to hunt with you one day and sit down over a cold one later and talk about what went right, what went wrong, and why we want to do it again.
All right, that's a date. Thanks again, Tom.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye. Like I said, right back to This Land is Your Land, our public access feature, right after you learn a little bit more about Dogtra's new T&B Dual collar and transmitter combo. Free shipping on purchases over $200, 10% more off of all products over $200. Just tell them in your coupon code opportunity, SLUN10, SLUN10 for 10% off the T&B Dual or anything else at the dogtra.com site over $200. T&B Dual in particular is one of my favorite e-collars, and I'll tell you why. One transmitter, no toggling back and forth between the two collars if you're running two dogs, or as I'm doing with Flick right now, running one on his flank to help with the steadiness while he's got another one on his neck to ensure the compliance on the force fetching side of things. Two collars, one control. You don't have to toggle back and forth. There are actually two parallel sets of buttons on the Dogtra T&B Dual. Learn more at dogtra.com. And we are back with one of my favorite features because, this land is your land. Let's talk a little bit about public access. Someplace you can go without buying a ticket, per se, without paying an admission fee, without staying in a spendy lodge or anything else. Just get there, and in this case, get to Northwest Missouri Yeah, they deserve a prize for being the first, I think, to fund wildlife conservation with I think it's a sales tax. But anyway, good job, Missourians. The Emmett and Leah Seat Memorial Conservation Area, it's about 100 miles south of Des Moines and 100 miles north of Kansas City, so it's smack dab in the middle there. The Seat Memorial Conservation Area has incredible bobwhite quail habitat, management funded by that little tiny sales tax. A little mix of everything, prairie, crops, timber, and heavy brush, big and small patches, so thrill a minute. Also for the deer hunters, so plan around deer season just in case. The Emmett and Leah Seat Memorial Conservation Area in northwest Missouri, they win the prize for great publicly accessible bobwhite quail habitat. First, let me welcome our newest sponsor here at the Upland Nation podcast, Tag Safari. Learn more about this incredible company and the wonderful work they're doing in Africa, among other places, at tagsafari.com. They got a brand new website and brand new product lines, from apparel to travel gear. Great selection of books, especially if you're interested in, the whole safari lifestyle. But more importantly, some of the things they're doing in Africa itself. All of the fabric starts as plants in Zimbabwe. It's woven, it's hand-picked, it's dyed, it is packaged in local product packaging, all of that helping out the local economy in Zimbabwe, among other places in Africa. Learn more about Tag Safari at tagsafari.com and tell them I sent you. I appreciate it, and so will they. And finally, thanks again to Dogtra and their new TNB Dual 1-unit, 2 dogs, wherever you want to put them. Parallel sets of buttons so you're not toggling back and forth. Learn more at dogtra.com. Okay, now, where were we? Oh, yeah. Finally, last but not least, thank you all for listening. I appreciate your attention, and wasn't Tom Huggler a great guy to talk to? Your reward for listening so carefully is the Upland Nation Trivia Quiz. The prize this week, a Sage and Breaker Mercantile Gun Care Tool Roll full of brushes and picks and all sorts of things to take care of your gun after the hunt. Get all that grit out of there and take good care of your favorite shotguns. That's the prize. The question is, another breed was created in large part due to a dispute among German long-haired pointer breeders over color. What's the name of that breed? Congratulations, Stephen Malm. You got the answer right. The large Munsterlander pointer. Yes, when they decided that black and white was no longer acceptable, then those folks broke away and started their own dang club and called them large Munsterlander pointers. You can guess why, can't you? I know you can. All right. Congratulations, Stephen. You'll be getting that Sage and Breaker Mercantile Gun Care Tool Roll. Stand by. Well, thank you so much for your kind attention. Please tell your friends, or don't forget to subscribe, and please leave us a review on whatever podcast website that you choose to download from. Yeah. Check the Upland Nation Facebook page. I'll see you at uplandnation.com. That's where you can get links to all of the sponsors' great offers, as well as more background information, and of course all of the wonderful publicly accessible places I talk about. I'll give you a little bit more information there, and then you can Googleize them all you want. I'm Scott Linden, your host. If I'm not talking to you here at the Upland Nation podcast, maybe you're watching me on the Wing Shooting USA TV show. Whatever it is, thank you again for your attention. Be safe, take a friend hunting, and we'll see you next time.